It was not too long after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey that members of Congress came out and said the court was illegitimate. It was not that long after that other branches of the federal government said that they do not agree with the ruling from SCOTUS. We had the DOJ, Merrick Garland, saying, no, we do not accept this. And now even the Department of Defense is rejecting the Supreme Court's rulings, worryingly saying they will keep performing abortions on bases that are consistent with federal law, even if they are in states with a total ban. And therein lies the big question. Where does this bring us? What is not in question? If you're an employee of the federal government, a federal agent, or work in law enforcement, if you are active duty military and you are in a state and you break the law, you will be charged, period. Now, the question is, what if you break the law on a military base? Well, that's federal property. The state may not actually go after you, but it depends on the zeal of the prosecutors and law enforcement. Here's what I'm worried about. The Pentagon says we're going to stay consistent with federal law, but I'm pretty sure the federal government can't outright commit felonies as it pertains to state jurisdiction, though they could say this military base, it's federal land, not your jurisdiction. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. It is setting up the states for a civil war. In states that outright ban abortions and view the practice as murder, I don't see them saying, in this instance, it's not our jurisdiction, so we back off. If things escalate, I don't know. Maybe the states just say, look, we think it's murder, but we're not going to go into a military base. But what if? What if there's a doctor working for the federal government who performs abortions, but he lives off base? What if then he leaves base after performing the procedure that is illegal, and then the cops say, we're going to arrest him? What if a federal agent, a federal employee, or member of the armed forces is arrested after leaving federal lands after having performed an abortion? I don't want to say there's a guarantee of civil war or whatever. I talk about this stuff, but at a certain point, come on, man, things are getting lined up. The first Civil War started because South Carolina was like, hey, you can't be in that building, those military bases, those fortresses. And the federal government says they belong to us. What happens now if the state says, we're not going to let you kill people? This is what you need to understand. The view on the moral issue of abortion is pronounced. It is different. The left says they're not people. The right says they are people. Do you think a red state would allow the federal government to execute someone, to kill them? Just commit homicide? I don't know. I don't think so. I think that would create some kind of major incident. But that seems like something like that happening where like a federal agent kills someone without cause. The state's probably going to be like, we want charges. In this instance, we're talking about the normalization of a procedure, something that happens much more frequently than, say, a one-off murder. Maybe I'm out of line. Maybe I'm wrong. But aside from this, we have another story, and that's Joe Biden has just backed ending the filibuster. It's called the nuclear option, so they can ram through federal protections or codification of Roe v. Wade. If they do that, when Republicans take the House and the Senate in November, it will be shockingly bad for them. Granted, they're not going to get anything through without a veto-proof majority, so maybe the Democrats don't care. But then come 2025, when you get a Trump or a DeSantis and total domination by the Republican Party, they are going to rubber stamp through every policy they ever wanted. You don't want to end that filibuster. But let's talk about what's going on at the Pentagon and the DOD. It is shocking, in my opinion, when you see the Attorney General and the Department of Defense defying the Supreme Court. But how will the states handle this? This will be interesting. Before we get started, head over to timcast.com and become a member to help support our work. The Daily Wire is too good. They're doing too well. Timcast should be doing well as well. Well, we're doing really well. But I'm watching the Daily Wire, almost 900,000 subs, and I'm like, come on, guys. Let's have a gentleman's race. Now, granted, they're way beyond us, but their victory is our victory. And I would like to see timcast.com grow to that level, launching new shows and doing all of that really awesome stuff. And with your support, we will be able to. Shout out to Daily Wire crew for all their success. We've got behind the scenes shows at timcast.com you can check out. And we're going to be doing paywalled opinion pieces, columns, written articles for members only, as well as launching new shows and documentaries. So with your support, we're going to make awesome stuff happen. Don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe to this channel, share the show with your friends. Let's read the news and once again talk about civil war, as I often do. The Daily Mail reports Pentagon will keep performing abortions on bases that are consistent with federal law, even if they are in states with a total ban. The Pentagon said Tuesday it will continue offering limited abortions to female service members and dependents at its facilities, regardless of how state law changes after the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Gil Cisneros, Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness, said that medical centers on military bases are federal facilities and won't change how they operate under the new ruling. Federal law stipulates that military facilities offer abortions in cases where the life of the mother is endangered or the pregnancy is the result of rape or incest. It prohibits the Department of Defense from paying for or offering other types of abortions. Now, I'll slow down. That is still protected. Okay, so even in places where there's like a total ban, for the most part, I think only Texas does not allow abortions in the case of rape or incest, but in the cases of the life of the mother is endangered, typically it's offered in every state. Now, with rape or incest, Texas says no dice. Texas is the state to keep an eye on. In Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization, the Supreme Court decided in a 5-4 decision on Friday to overturn Roe. The landmark ruling, this we already know. Without Roe, a number of states have said they will ban abortions even in the case of rape or incest. States like Alabama and Arkansas have laws that were blocked by the courts until the Dobbs decision. After Dobbs, those laws are likely to take effect. Florida bans abortion after 15 weeks with no exceptions. And states like Louisiana and Texas have trigger laws that are soon to take effect, implementing a near total ban on abortion, including for rape or incest. All state abortion bans include some sort of exception when the life of the mother is threatened. The Supreme Court decision does not prohibit the department from continuing to perform covered abortions consistent with federal law. There will be no interruption to this care, Cisneros' memo read. States may not impose criminal or civil liability on federal employees who perform their duties in a manner authorized by federal law, the memo said. And that is the interesting line. And maybe that's where it ends. But I pulled up some stories to suggest it may not be that simple. Simply declaring that you are legally allowed to break state law does not mean it's true. And though many people basically say, well, federal law supersedes state law, you have the supremacy clause. I don't know how that's going to play out ideologically, but let's read more. I want to read this again. They say states may not impose criminal or civil liability on federal employees who perform their duties in a manner authorized by federal law. The Pentagon performed 91 abortions at its facilities from 2016 to 2021, according to an internal report obtained by USA Today. I want to point this out. The first Civil War. It was stated by Buchanan, he was president at the time, that secession was illegal. You can't do that. Hey, the states did it anyway, and then people started shooting each other. I don't know if we're really at that point where states are going to be like, we will arrest you. We don't care what the feds think. But we could be gradually and then suddenly. The federal government coming out and saying we can ignore state laws doesn't mean you can. There have been many stories about federal agents arrested by state police. I've got some, and I'll show you. Cisneros added in the memo that the court's decision will have significant implications for our service members, dependents, other beneficiaries of DOD healthcare services, and civilian employees, as well as the readiness of the force. The memo said that service members will still be able to use paid sick leave to travel to another state to obtain an abortion. Meanwhile, Health and Human Services Secretary Xavier Becerra on Tuesday directed federal agencies to ensure that all women have access to medication abortions in the case of rape or incest. The secretary told reporters that federal law requires HHS programs grant abortion pills in exceptional circumstances, including rape or incest, or when the mother's life is at risk. Now, we're hearing a lot of this. Roe v. Wade ruling sees MSNBC, CNN, and more go full scorched earth, quote, civil war. I know. I'm not the only one who said it. Here's one from the LA Times. Has the Supreme Court put us on the path to civil war? The Supreme Court? I don't know if the Supreme Court did it. I think it's a collection of issues. But let me talk to you about enforcing the law against federal officers. So first, we have this story from the Columbus Dispatch. ATF agent accuses Columbus police officers of excessive force. All right, let's walk through this. I remember this story. A lot of people laughed about it. An ATF agent was serving a warrant about a shotgun. He acted a fool, and the cops pinned him, detained him, and he says excessive force. Okay, this agent, it doesn't matter. Maybe this one doesn't matter. These cops did not know he was an agent. They said, we don't know or care who you are. You can say whatever you want. Get on the ground. And that's why he was detained. He also wasn't on federal land. But you can see in this instance that there are local police who will arrest, detain, and question or investigate federal officers. Because it doesn't matter if you're a federal officer. They don't know or care if they're investigating. But maybe this is not a good example. Let's move forward. Here's a story from WWL-TV. Federal agent arrested after several misconduct complaints. He was arrested by the Louisiana State Police. A federal agent was arrested by Louisiana State Police. So here's a guy who was accused of committing crimes. But was he arrested for something he did on federal jurisdiction? I don't know if that matters. He was arrested by the state police. And then we have this. Active duty Marine pleads not guilty to murder count in fatal shooting at Miramar Road Bar. Once again, this is an individual who was on state property, state jurisdiction, who was accused of a crime, was arrested and pleaded not guilty. He was arrested by, I believe, sheriffs, San Diego, or I don't know about that. He's being prosecuted by the San Diego County Deputy District Attorney. This is a district attorney. I don't believe this. I don't think this is a federal case. I could be wrong about this one. Let me double check. I'm assuming if it's the Deputy District Attorney for San Diego. Okay, I'm sorry. It's San Diego County, so this is not federal. Anyway, the point is, there are many stories that you can easily pull up of active duty service personnel, federal agents, and employees who are criminally charged at the state level. But there is still the greater question of whether or not someone on federal jurisdiction will be arrested for performing an illegal act because the federal government wants them to. I want to stress this point, okay? The federal government says you're allowed to terminate the life of the baby. Just do your job. The state says killing a baby is illegal. The question is, will the state say we will not allow these atrocities? The issue is the strength at which the moral conviction exists within the individuals. The feds can come out and say all they want. You cannot be criminally or civilly held responsible if we tell you to do it. But we have long said just doing my job is no excuse. Will we come to a point where a very zealous prosecutor or police officers don't care? Let me tell you a story. Up in New York City, it is legal for women to walk around with no shirts on, with their boobies hanging out. Up in New York, it's legal. There are many instances, however, where the police don't care. There are stories where there's this one woman, morbidly obese older woman, walks around topless. And cops go up to her and say, ma'am, you have to put a shirt on or go home. And she says, no, I don't. The cops arrest her or cuff her. She sues and she wins instantly. But regardless of the law, the cops still arrest her. They don't care. Which brings us to this question. What if there is a pro-life Christian conservative police officer? Very pro-life. And they are told at the state level of anyone who provides or performs an abortion will have committed a felony. And he knows for a fact that this doctor has done such a thing. He has proof. Maybe he has a complaint. Here's a scenario. A man and a woman, they copulate. You know what I mean? Woman gets pregnant. The woman is active duty military. So is the man, perhaps. The man begs the woman not to get the procedure. She says she's getting it anyway. He says, I'll go with you. And they together go to the hospital. This man witnesses the doctor perform the procedure. Or is there and has shown evidence to the fact that it happened and then files a complaint with the state. This doctor performed an illegal abortion. He was witness to it, watched it happen. Or perhaps something easier. A woman invites her pro-life mom, and the mom is like, don't do this. And she says, I want you to be in there with me. I don't know. Maybe it's absurd that a family member or significant other would be there while it's happening. But regardless, they can be in the hospital. They can go with them. They go to the prosecutor and say, I swear under oath, this man performed it, admitted it to me. I saw part or some of the procedure. The court, the prosecutor now says, we've got sworn witness testimony of a crime being committed in our state. Perhaps it's as simple as to say, look, we're not going to go up against the federal government. But then the man says, this dude doesn't live on base. This guy is a doctor. He's a civilian doctor contracting with the feds. So the state says, so wait, hold on. He's a civilian? He's a contractor for the feds? He performed the procedure on federal grounds in line with federal law, but as a resident of the state under our jurisdiction? The question is, if you live in a state and the state has evidence that you committed a crime in a different state, do they prosecute you? I'm not a lawyer. I don't know all the answers. But what about federal jurisdiction? This is where it gets tough, because I don't think it matters that the law says precedent states that they can't do that. I'm sure a lot of lawyers will be like, Tim, no, the state can't prosecute. All that matters is they try. All that matters is you get a staunchly pro-life Catholic, Christian, conservative, or otherwise very pro-life prosecutor who's got a witness who says, I will sign a sworn statement, and then documents showing the procedure happens. Like, here's the files from it with the guy's name signed on it saying he did it, and they say that is a felony in this state. The guy leaves the base, is driving home, gets pulled over, and they say, you are under arrest. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say or do will be used against you in the court of law while you're being Mirandized, because when an investigation is happening, you get Mirandized. What happens then? Do the feds then say, we will not allow this? Now, in today's day and age, I don't think this ends with people shooting each other. But what happens when the federal government says we're going to keep doing it? What happens when you get a state that is hyper polarized, geographically polarized, and everyone there is adamantly pro-life? What happens when the abortion performed is at 8.5 months and the problem, the safety of the mother, was a mental health issue, and the doctor terminates the life of the baby in accordance with the codification Democrats set forward? I will say this right now. Maybe it's extreme to state, but the Democrats have tried codifying a law that would allow abortion up to the point of birth if the mother's health is in jeopardy. But if the baby is viable, why kill it? Abortion is defined as a procedure that terminates a pregnancy in a way that does not result in a live birth, according to the CDC. That would mean, let's say the mother has a heart problem. She's 8 months pregnant. The baby is viable, can survive on its own. Well, maybe go to the ICU for safety reasons, but the baby can survive. The doctor says, ma'am, if you keep carrying this baby, you will die. Under the Democrats' bill, he could just then kill the baby, even if it could survive on its own. Men on the left say that it's not an abortion, then it's a C-section. No. That's delivery of the baby. Abortion terminates the life. Let's say they codify this. We're not talking about a circumstance in which a woman is 6 weeks pregnant or even 15 weeks pregnant, and they go in and end the pregnancy or give her some kind of medically induced abortion. Medicinal, medication-based. We're talking about a circumstance where the Democrats codify late-term abortion and a woman gets one because she's depressed. Do you think then, and I'm not saying it will happen, I'm just saying, imagine that scenario where a federal prosecutor says you terminated the life of a baby at 9 months right before it was to be born because the woman was depressed and that was the mental health issue? We're prosecuting that. And the feds say, no, you can't. It's our jurisdiction. Say you're in our state and you're bringing people in. We will not allow it. What if the woman is active duty and she lives off base and the doctor is a civilian contractor who lives off base and they go onto base to do it? If a doctor who lives in a state smuggles a woman outside the jurisdiction to perform the procedure, I'm pretty sure the state would still go after the individual. So how does this end? I don't know, but I feel like we're headed towards chaos. The LA Times seems to think so, at least a little bit, publishing this op-ed. Has the Supreme Court put us on the path towards civil war? To the editor. In 1857, the U.S. Supreme Court decided that a black man was not a citizen and therefore had no right to control his own body. For a number of years, many in the South had already been threatening secession, but the court's decision so shocked the North that people there were too in frame of mind that our country was of two cultures. Thus, the Civil War began in 1861. It's a bit different. There's a bit more nuance there. The Mississippi abortion case set on Friday is eerily parallel. It is the Dred Scott case of our time. The justices decided that more than 50% of our population do not have a right to control their own bodies. Actually, no, that's the opposite of what they've decided. The Supreme Court ruled, first and foremost, they don't have the authority to weigh in on these issues, and it's a state issue. So they didn't say anything about that. But actually, the Roe decision argued that the baby is a body and has its own rights. And thus, we got the trimester standard. Then Roe and Casey set the viability standard. But the basic idea of the federal government was, if the baby is its own body, at what point does it have constitutional rights? And the argument was basically viability. And thus, abortion is allowed up until the baby is viable for the most part, they say. And just as in the 1850s, for a number of years, some have been talking about secession. This court decision has so shocked the rest of us, we no longer recognize our country. It puts us in a frame of mind that we are truly two countries. With communications being much faster than in Scott's day, the next civil war may come more quickly. I do not want to see the bloody conflict the right-wing militias are thirsting for. I would rather the matter be decided with a nationwide referendum. I write this with a saddened heart. Melconian. Probably pronouncing your name wrong, but I agree. We don't want the conflict. Unfortunately, it's not about what we want. Of course, nobody wants war, but war comes. I mean, some people do. You know, Henry Kissinger wanted war, I guess. The neocons, the Democrats, they love war. But I mean, among the regular people, nobody wants war. But it's the direction we're heading in. Right. Melconian, I know you don't want to see bloody conflict that you think the right-wing militias are thirsting for, and there probably are many. I certainly don't want to see the conflict that Antifa is thirsting for, and I know for a fact they are. The issue is, what happens when an abortion is performed on federal jurisdiction in a state by people who are subjects of the law of that state among a person who lives as a resident of that state? Will the state prosecutor just say, we know you did it, we don't care where? That's the issue. Now, I don't know if military bases or federal lands will bring on civilian contractors to perform abortions, but I don't see why not. Perhaps the abortions will be performed by doctors who are, in the armed forces of some sort. Okay. I still think there's a strong possibility that there's going to be a doctor who is active duty, who lives off base, which means they are subject to the laws of the state, who performs an abortion on an active duty female service member who lives in that same state off base, who is subject to the laws of that state. And the prosecutor says to this man, I don't care where you performed the illegal activity. We have evidence you did. They get the documents, the name signed off on it. And he says, but the federal government says I can't be held. And they say, you killed someone. That's how we see it. I don't know. In another letter, they basically say the same thing. There are many letters to the LA Times editor talking about the Supreme Court and Roe v. Wade. So here we are. And now Joe Biden is talking about ending the filibuster. What'll happen? What comes next? The Democrats, I think, will desperately try to codify Roe v. Wade in some capacity. In order to do so, they will need to bypass the filibuster. However, the codification of Roe did not fail because of the filibuster. It failed because Manchin said no. They could not get enough votes. Manchin said, this doesn't codify Roe. It expands abortion. Would nullify some 500 state laws. I'm not signing it. If the Democrats do nullify the filibuster, if they do end the filibuster, meaning they only need 50 votes and the tiebreaker from Kamala, then put forward a more reasonable codification that Manchin gets behind. Then, according to federal law, in federal jurisdictions, they say we can do it. Now, the federal government can only perform this in the case of rape, incest, or health of the mother. What happens if in Texas, where there is no exception for rape and incest, that's where the abortion occurs? What if? What if? We have a normalcy bias and we have optimism bias. The what if question is interesting because our optimism bias says it's never going to get that bad even if it does happen, right? Things just can't happen. The good stuff is going to happen. It's not going to go bad. Well, I'll tell you this right now. Optimism bias, out the window. This is not good, regardless of how it's framed, left or right. Bad things are happening. Either the federal government is saying we're going to ignore state law, which is bad for the pro-life side, and for the pro-choice side, abortion's being banned. What about normalcy bias? These things can't happen. Everything's going to keep on keeping on because no one's got the willpower. We are already in unprecedented times. Roe v. Wade being overturned is the biggest story of our generation, of multiple generations. It's huge, at least in terms of domestic policy. A reality TV real estate mogul was president. We are already in unprecedented times. Normalcy bias is out the window. So why would you just assume it couldn't happen? The Democrats should be warned about getting rid of the filibuster. Last time they did that, they opened the door to 3 Supreme Court justices being put on the Supreme Court. And that's it. Mitch McConnell was then able to get these justices on. And then Roe v. Wade was overturned by 1 vote. If Ruth Bader Ginsburg had retired and Obama was able to replace her, this wouldn't have happened. But let's be real. Mitch McConnell jammed up Obama at the very end, making it impossible. No matter what, this is where we were headed. Even if Ruth Bader Ginsburg retired, she would have had to have retired earlier, before Obama lost the House and the Senate. Then they could have appointed somebody who'd still be in office today, and Roberts would not have sided with overturning Roe. So it does seem ultimately like it's all inevitable. Like we're watching the grand story play out before our eyes. Several years ago, I said civil war. Y'all told me I was crazy. Y'all laughed at me. I'm just kidding. A lot of people were like, you're nuts. Vice made fun of me for selling emergency food, and now we're in a food shortage with a food shortage to come. I wasn't wrong. That's a funny thing. In 2012, I was talking to a journalism professor. She told me, Tim, you have the unfortunate privilege of being ahead of the market. And I was like, man, yeah, really? I was doing street live streaming, and none of these big companies wanted to fund it. They didn't know how. It wasn't part of their business plans. So they didn't do it. And that was it. And then a couple of years later, they all started picking it up. But by then, I had already moved on because I have the unfortunate privilege of being ahead of the market. Maybe it's because I read a lot. In 2018, I said it looks like we're headed towards civil war. I was reading articles saying as such. People said I was crazy and I was wrong and it could never happen. Then the culture war reached the highest levels of the federal government. I mean, it was already there with Trump, but became pronounced and substantially worse. Now you've got the Department of Justice, the Department of Defense, outright rejecting the Supreme Court. Now, it's not like they're saying, you know, the Supreme Court banned abortion or anything like that. They're just saying we're going to keep doing what we want, regardless of state law. No, I think when you look at the food shortages, and I said, you know, buy emergency food because a food shortage could come, it wasn't a hard bet to make. The news stories were outright saying costs were through the roof, inflation was through the roof, and food was in short supply. Now we've got news stories saying that there's going to be a lower crop yield at the fall harvest and no diesel to actually harvest the crops in the first place. Sounds like a food shortage. Several months ago, maybe about 8 months ago, Alex Jones made a statement on his show that went viral. It went viral at the end of February. He said, at the end of February, there's going to be a major war. They're gearing up for it. And people said, it's prophetic. How did Alex Jones know? Alex gave a simple explanation. He was like, it was all in the news. It wasn't a secret. You just needed to read it. And you could read about the funding. You could read about the warnings. You could read about Vladimir Putin's troop buildup on Ukraine's eastern border. So when February happened and the invasion happened, everyone went, Alex Jones was right. How did he know? And Alex goes, I just read the news. So people think it's prophetic. It's not. When I say this stuff is coming, I'm not just making stuff up. I'm saying, I don't know if it'll actually happen. I'm saying there's a decent probability, but we are reading right now. Let me break this down for you. The Department of Defense saying, regardless of state law, we will perform abortions. If the state says we will prosecute anyone who aids in abortion, it doesn't matter where it happens. Let's say there's an active duty service personnel. What do I do? And her friend says, let me help you out. And her friend's a civilian. The states will go after her. Let's say it's a civilian doctor or not even, but they live off base, subject to the jurisdiction of the state. The state will go after them. Why would they not? And then what happens when the federal government says no? Could it be? Is it possible? It doesn't seem likely, but imagine an active duty service personnel on their way. They live off base. They're married. They're driving in. And a bunch of state police vehicles stop them right before they get into the base, and they say, you're under arrest for aiding and abetting abortion. And the woman's like, but I work for the federal government. And they're like, you're subject to our laws. Just because you're in the Army or the Air Force or the Marines doesn't mean you're allowed to break state law. What happens when there is a vehicle being driven by a federal agent to federal jurisdiction, a federal military base, and it gets pulled over by the state, and they say the person in the back seat, the doctor, performed an abortion, he's being arrested. What happens when the feds say, you can't take him, we won't let you? Who backs down? What happens when it gets to that point? Now, it might not. It might not. We could be decades away, who knows? With the speed at which communication is happening, I think it's possible it happens. But I'm not a psychic. You know, I said that it felt like we were getting closer and closer to civil war, and now all these outlets are saying basically the same thing. We saw in 2020 this idea among this big network of prominent Democrats that if Donald Trump won, the West Coast would secede. That's what they argued would happen. Maybe not. Nothing like that's really happened so far. But nobody thought Roe v. Wade would be overturned. These are unprecedented times. So maybe I'm wrong. Or maybe pay attention to the fact that the door has been opened, that it is possible. And then we'll see what happens. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 8 p.m. over at youtube.com/TimCastIRL or at timcast.com. You can watch live there. Thanks for hanging out. And we'll see you all then.